Please welcome Tammy Dunnett. Tammy, as the founder and CEO of Relationship Revolution, Tammy is changing the way relationship is done, one conversation at a time. As an ex-target of workplace bullying turned communication coach, Tammy shares the lessons learned in her journey out of the darkness to reclaim her greatness and her career. And she shares simple, actionable, step by step strategies to help you do the same. I am so excited and thankful to have my friend here, Tammy, and she is going to walk us through how to navigate tough conversations and interpersonal conflict in a way that makes you stand out as a leader. I know this is an area that so many of us struggle with. So, welcome, Tammy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Tara, for having me. And before we even get into it, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all the work you're doing and thank you for putting this summit together and giving people like myself a platform to share their knowledge and to help elevate the world. So thank you for putting this together. And I know how much work goes into that.
Thank you so much, Tammy. Your friendship and your expertise means the world to me. Coming from a place of human resources and what you do, the work that you do is just so, it's priceless because it's something that we all face, and you really can't succeed in your career unless you have been able to master communication confidently. And part of that is managing conflict. So I'm really excited to dive into your expertise today, for the audience.
Yeah, you're so right. Conflict is always there. It's inevitable. That's one of its main characteristics, endearing or not. It's always going to be present for us. And it's really a great moment of leadership development, is really how I see it, because it's going to teach us something either about ourselves, our team, our gaps, our strengths, and we can continue to pivot and get stronger with that.
Awesome. So what would you say are the usual what are the usual signs that people may start to kind of experience when they're having difficulty managing those tough conversations? What is someone that kind of they might be listening to this thinking, well, I could potentially use some work in this area, but I'm really not sure. What are some signs that they could use some help?
I think that's a great question. And I would just like to start maybe by sharing how I learned that I needed some help in this area, because I think it's going to resonate with a lot of the people who are attending this summit. Being a young professional, well, I say young because I was in my 30s. Young is all relative, right? Being a young career professional woman who's rising, like I just was 2 years into my career as a nurse, and things were going great. I had no problems. I got along with everybody, didn't really have a lot of tension. And then I had a new supervisor come in, and immediately we were put at odds based on the way in which we were talking about a particular issue. And it didn't change. For 4 years, I was struggling to figure out how to have a conversation with this lady because I thought I could do it. And I thought I could teach her how to treat me. And I think a lot of people who are confident
Mhm.
don't realize that they need support because they're like, well, I've managed before, I can figure this out. And they tend to just trudge through without getting guidance and coaching and mentoring. It's much like what I did. And it wasn't until 2 years into that relationship, that was when I had a very pivotal moment where a colleague had let me know that our boss was actually tarnishing my relationship when people were coming into the organization. And up until that moment, I just thought I had a bad boss, somebody I could manage.
Yeah.
And even though it wasn't going well, I still thought I was doing okay. And it was in that moment I realized I had a bully boss. And so, from an employee perspective, it really shifted how I felt confident and capable to manage this relationship. And I ended up getting really sick to the point that I was frozen in my home. I wasn't looking at emails, I wasn't answering phones, I wasn't leaving my house because I was panicked and anxiety ridden, just thinking about going to the workplace. That's how bad it got. It was through my recovery and healing that I started to really investigate this through my master's of nursing. I studied lateral violence through every course that I could fit it into the theme, and teaching communication skills at the same time. I was able to realize what the gap was and put these pieces together. And now I help leaders position themselves so they do not get labeled as a bully, but that they can actually still come in and have that expert power.
Definitely, because I think you touched on two really important things that you felt like you could confidently navigate this landscape yourself until, unbeknownst to you, someone clues you in and that, hey, there's more going on here than you may realize. And sadly, that may be the truth for many that are listening. They think, oh, I've got this covered, no issues other than the frustration and the annoyance that I experience on a daily basis. And I guess I would ask the audience, is it really worth it to be frustrated and annoyed on a daily basis? Probably not. You might want to go and fix that, even if you think you can confidently handle it. But another thing, there's three things you said, actually. You mentioned a gap that you were trying to figure out what was that gap. And then the third thing that you mentioned is that sometimes as leaders that have to follow an agenda, right? That have to meet deadlines. Sometimes if you are one of those people watching, maybe you come off abrasive or almost too straightforward and people take it the wrong way. And that can also, from the flip side, can negatively impact those that are either working for you or with you. So I would love to dive, I guess, first into how did you kind of start working out what that gap was,
Okay,
and
well,
kind of walk us through that.
yeah, that was actually a longer journey. So the actual, experience with the bully boss was 4 years. And then there's lots of years of therapy and recovery and all the
I
studying.
understand that.
And so in leaving that job, and I think this is so common with many people, whether you're in a formal leadership position or not, I define a leader as anybody who's in the moment when they witness something that they can help elevate the practice of another person. So you don't need a title to become a leader and help somebody else become a better human. But in that process of my healing and recovering, I forget the question.
So there was that you said that you were working out the gap.
Yeah.
And then it took, it took a little bit for you to figure out what, you thought you had it handled, and then someone clued you in and you're like, well, wait a minute.
Yes.
What's going on here? So walk us through kind of your healing journey and kind of putting the pieces together as to what was that communication gap.
Yeah. So in that healing journey, when I was starting to discover who I was in that kind of conflict, I wasn't looking deep enough. And I'll say that because when I left that job, because often leaving is healing. And that's what I think a lot of people do is they're like, I'm frustrated. I can't figure this out. I'm just going to go somewhere else. And I see a lot of people do that. I did the same. And it was 2 years into my new job where everything again was going great. It's funny, there's that 2-year mark, just hearing that now for the first time. 2-year mark in the new job, I came across my next bully. And to be honest, I was thinking, okay, Tammy, you can't be like, how is it you're finding all the bullies? There's got to be something you're doing. I was thinking it inside, but my husband said it outside. He's like, do you think you need to look at what you're doing? And that kind of stings when somebody says that. You don't want somebody else to recognize that maybe you had a part to play in this. So it was in the second bully instance that I actually had to get deeper and really look at, okay, what am I doing when I come to this conversation? Because I was confident. I was assertive, as they teach us to be, but I was also unrelenting. And I was pretty much going to get my way because that's how you treat me. And I had to really look at it, the way I was using language, the way I was speaking up and not speaking out or back before I could really start to figure out some of those pieces.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the language you just used. You were speaking up as in, this is what I need, right? I'm assuming, instead of speaking out and back. Talk us a little bit about what that means.
Yeah. So what I realized, and it might help, maybe I have to go to the board for this. We'll see. What I realized through the research and the work that I've done, the gap was in communication. It's interpersonal problems need to have an interpersonal solution. What the medical system does, and they're needed because I was sick, is they give you medications to keep you well enough to go back to the workplace that's hurting you. The organizational system does its part by trying to remediate the bad behaviors, but the lack of communication between the two, the lack of interpersonal solutions, never resolves the problem. And so for me, being medically numb to work in a place that's hurting me didn't make sense. And being a nurse, it was actually quite baffling. And it hurt my heart to think that this is what we're doing to our patients. Now I'm the patient and I'm seeing what's happening to them. And I'm like, this doesn't make sense. There's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I realized is when I dissected all of the conflicts I'd had that went well, there were very obvious characteristics that existed. Now, being a nurse, I walked the line between enabling a patient and helping a patient. And there's a lot of conflict that can come with that. Patients yell at you, families are angry with you, doctors are mad because you haven't implemented the strategies yet. So there's a lot of practice being a nurse.
Yeah. It's a lot of juggling.
It is. And I got really good at it. And I actually loved it when someone said, oh, that patient is difficult. I'm like, sign me up, because I had something that was working and I could get through almost every patient and find out what their issue was so that we could actually start moving together.
That's a
For
skill.
me, what I
sure.
lacked, what I recognized as what I lacked was the ability to pause. I went straight to talking. So we have our natural response. We have a fight or flight response. And then we have a communication response. We're either talking or we get quiet when we feel like we're threatened. For me, I go to the talking and the fighting quadrant, right? So imagine that's like put along your horizontal axis, flight and fight. And then you have talk and quiet on your vertical axis. I was in the top right quadrant of talking and fighting. So like, I will tell you what I think. I will tell you how you will treat me. And, there's a lot of scope in there. It can be also the aggressive person who's name calling and shaming and blaming. But we can also have passive aggressive and indirect communication in the talk quadrants. But I recognized my fault was I was bypassing the shutting up phase and asking questions and understanding phase. I was straight into the I'm going to tell you phase. What's going to happen here?
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that is like the difference. That's interesting that we have that fight or flight, response that is what we do as humans. And then we also have the communication. I am also in the talking portion in a different way. So talk to me a little bit about, because we all have different responses. So I would have to say I fall in the talking category, right? But I am like, my natural personality style is I don't like conflict. So I'm more on the people pleasing side. So I just go into talking mode, but it's not from this is how you're going to treat me phase. So walk me through, well, how does someone like that, how do they kind of rein it in so that they can have some effective communication? And then kind of walk me on the flip side of someone that's quiet that kind of needs to speak up. What are some of your tips for effective communication? Okay, cool. I can see it.
See that. Yeah. So on the one quadrant, we have flight and fight. And that's a natural reaction. It's very instinctual. And it's a desired reaction because your body senses a threat. We have anxiety and we go into defense mode. For you, what you just shared is that you're a talker, but you avoid conflict. So you're up in this quadrant. You take flight away from it. And then flying away from it doesn't mean that you are avoiding it. You're just being a little bit more discreet. So these are the people who, if you've ever had someone come to your house late at night and they're visiting and you're like ready to go to bed, but they haven't left yet, I would suspect you might be the kind of person who would look at the watch and go, oh my gosh, is it already like 10 o'clock? Wow, where did the time go? And hope that they get the hint. What you're really asking them is, how long are you staying? Because I'd like to make some plans for tomorrow.
I'd like to go to bed. You can either go to sleep in my guest bedroom or you're out of here.
Yeah. And so recognizing right away, you can pick out where people are at just by knowing this. So in the lower quadrant, here we are. This is my flight and my quiet. These are typically what's called the avoiders and the accommodators. Now, I don't like those titles because I find people think they're a destination, meaning, oh, I'm an avoider. I'm never going to speak up. And they put themselves in this box and they stay inside this box and they never leave it. And that's when we have conflict. We need to be able to leave this box and explore the other ones. Oops, going the wrong way. Explore the other ones to get to resolution. So you see there's the pausers here. This is what I call them, my pausers, because they need time to figure out what they're feeling, what their next step is going to be. And then we have the askers and the understanders. These are the ones who need more information. Then we have our speakers. Those are the ones who are talking. So they need validation usually about their ideas, even though it may not seem like they need validation. That's what they're looking for. And then we have the doers. And this group was largely left out before because we talked about avoiders, accommodators, indirect, passive, aggressive, and direct. And then there was nothing for these people who are quiet and do. They're going to solve the problems, but they're just going to get into action. And so very quickly in a conflict, if you just keep those two quadrants in mind as a leader, you'll be able to see where you are and where they are. And then you can come to the middle and try to find a bridge towards where they're at. Sometimes that means meeting in another quadrant. What's so great about this is we're actually a blend of all of those.
Yeah.
We have been in all of those quadrants before, which means we can find a place to connect. You know, I think for me, I'm pretty outgoing most of the time, but if I'm in a crowded environment with people I don't know, I will be in the pauser quadrant. I'm going to want space. I'm going to want time. I'm not going to jump in. I'm not going to really tell you what I think because I'm not feeling safe at this point. So knowing that that's how I feel draw, I know I need safety. If I'm in another quadrant and I'm in conflict with you, let's just say, and I'm in the doing, well, you may not feel safe about what I'm doing. So I can go, okay, maybe I need to stop and just explain a few things so she understands where we're going so that she can settle down the anxiety. Just recognizing where they're at can help you build a bridge.
That makes sense. And I think a lot of us don't take the time to kind of A, evaluate where we're at, and then B, really look to see, take the emotion out, right? Because I think sometimes, like, what do you say to that? Because I think that might be, and I want to talk a little bit about what prevents people from having those analytical way of looking at things. Because right now we're kind of just talking about personality style, communication styles, and how we need to know where we're at versus the other person in order to effectively communicate. But I know there are times when we're emotional human beings, and that can sometimes cloud our judgment. It can get in the way. So kind of walk me through some of the things that stop people from A, doing that, and then B, how can you work your way through those obstacles in order to have a reality check of where they're at versus where you're at, and how to, meet in the middle.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And you bring up a really good point, is that we're in reaction mode. That emotional piece is reaction. That's your fight or flight. And just building that self-awareness, it takes time. It's not going to happen overnight. We can't just tell you, hey, watch for your fight or flight reaction and stop it. I mean, we need to just recognize I'm at one end of this or the other right now, and I'm in this quadrant, and I just need to take a few moments. And it's easy just to say, you know what, can we pause this for a second? Think you can take it. This can happen literally in seconds, or you may need a day, or maybe you're going to need a couple days to let the heat simmer if you're in that really big fight section. So self-awareness is probably the first thing to build. How do I recognize where I'm at? And then once I recognize where I'm at, can I recognize where they are at? Because then I need to be able to connect with something in me that recognizes that quadrant. I think of, I kind of put it in some pen here. I hope that's visible to your readers. Yeah. So yeah, the P, AU is for ask and understand, S is for speak, D is for do, and in the middle is E, that's the exploring options. And this is actually part of my paused model. When you unravel this and you spell the word pause, every successful conflict I have had has had every single element in there. And I'll give you an example. I had a patient who was extubated in the ICU, and we love them when they're intubated because they don't talk back. Yeah. Now, typically when you extubate them, they're thankful and they're happy that you've been helping them. They have questions, am I going to be okay? This patient, we extubated him and he immediately was insulting me, swearing at me, taking down me, the doctors, the healthcare, everything I cherish. Now, do you think I was in fight or flight? Yeah, I went to fight right away. And in my head, I was already putting together all the lists of the reasons why he needed to trust me.
Yeah.
And I was waiting for him to stop because he was ranting on and on and on and chastising me. And at the same time, when I was able to recognize that I was in fight mode and say to myself, this isn't the value that I want. I want to be connected, caring, and curious. Those are the 3 values that lead my life. I was able to switch instantly out of it and go back into, I need to pause for a second. I need to ask some questions to understand, where is this coming from? Because this does not match the input. Like, what you're giving me does not match how we just saved your life, right? And then I was able to share, and then we were able to get into exploration. Now, at the same time I was switching out of my defense mode, another nurse was walking by and she said, if I were you, I'd just give it right back to him. And that's very natural, because we're like, holy crap, he's like saying we're all bad people and we have worked tirelessly to save him.
Mm-hmm.
But in asking him questions and pausing my perception and taking a break from what I was thinking was happening and asking him for some information, I learned that he actually had his jaw broken when he was younger and he had it wired shut. And he thought he was going to drown on his own secretions when he was younger. Now, fast forward to today, he's got this tube in his throat and he can't clear his secretions.
He's freaking out, probably.
Yeah, he was feeling extremely unsafe and that we weren't going to be able to save him.
Yeah.
Once I got that, we were able to come to a shared conclusion and come up with the process going forward. When he left that ICU, he was shaking the hands of every person and thanking them. And his mom said to me, what did you do? And I'm like, I just listened. I halted my perception and my reaction, and I engaged with interaction. And that's what this model does, is it forces you to go, which part am I missing? I was in the defense and talk, right? I was going to hammer him with all the reasons why he should be trusting me.
I love it.
Come back and go, okay, wait a second. I might have this wrong. I need to park this for a second, pause my reaction, engage, and understand him first.
I love that. So that pause piece, I mean, I think that pause piece, when we're in the heat of the moment, just thinking pause,
That's right.
I think that it's something that's really easy to implement. And I'm sure that it's kind of funny that nurse was like, I just give it right back. And then you probably prompted you to think, you know what? That's exactly what I probably shouldn't do. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me to pause.
Yeah.
and not go into that.
I think our role, so coming back to the leaders and how they can use this, we have role constraints. We already know that as a leader, we want to be perceived in a particular way, right? So some leaders have what's called legitimate power. They've got it by the nature of their title, supervisor, manager. And there's an expectation that they will have some authority to tell you what you can and can't do. So, I mean, there's an acceptance that legitimate power exists. What we want to move towards, and I think this is where the flat hierarchy comes from, is expert power. And I think of when I think of expert power, I think of, as a nurse, I had the doctor, the physios, the occupational therapist, all these people around the bedside, and we all shared our observations and knowledge. But somebody still had the leader power. Someone still had the legitimate power to make the decisions, and that was the doctor. He was writing the orders. Okay, those are good ideas. Well, let's not try that. Let's do this. Somebody has to have that authority. But the expert power that comes to the table helps the leader make the best decision. And I think when it comes to conflict as a leader, how do you navigate through it so that you can come out looking like a really good leader is gather the expert that's coming from the people in which you're working with. Listen to them. What are they sharing with you? What are their concerns? What are they not saying? So that would be in that upper quadrant, flight and talk. They're being very indirect. They're asking questions and dancing around a topic, but they're not getting to the point. That's because they're afraid. They're not sure how to say this to you without causing harm to your reputation or your image.
Yeah, that's very interesting because, our goal today essentially is how can you navigate these tough conversations and manage conflict from anywhere, and position yourself as a leader. And, I know, and as a hiring manager and me from HR, that it's something that you look for when you're going to promote. How does this person manage conflict? What is their communication style? Are they going to effectively be able to manage others as well as work with their peers? So I'm glad that you just like kind of started to dive into this topic. So what are some things, some advice that you would give someone that maybe they're dealing with interpersonal conflicts, but they necessarily haven't addressed it yet? And they also have big career aspirations. What would you tell that person?
First, I would wonder if it's their responsibility to address it or if it's their responsibility to guide and mentor. I think so many leaders feel like they have to have the answers, and that puts a lot of pressure on them. And then they start to get defensive in that they're not looking competent or capable. So they're worried about, like you said, promotion, maybe getting an advanced position, opportunities for training. And so they feel a lot of pressure that they put on themselves. And it's been my experience that they're not as likely to ask for mentoring because of that facade that they feel they need to have it all figured out. So the first thing is to really just recognize, am I having to solve the problems? Is that my job as a manager and a leader? Or is my job to guide? So when somebody comes to me, whether it's one of my students or it's another staff member or even a leader comes to me, my job is to help them see how they can guide the other person, not solve the problem. Because you want to build the capacity of those. Remember I said earlier, for me, a definition of a leader is the person who in the moment has the opportunity to elevate the people around them.
Mm-hmm.
The manager is not there in the moment. Oftentimes an employee comes to them with this issue and the manager's like now in conflict with somebody they didn't even know they had a conflict with. They're going to get out of their office, go looking for this person. Come on over here. We need to have a conversation, but they don't have any data. And so it's really about the person who comes to you now with the issue is mentoring them to have that first conversation.
Absolutely. That's interesting because really you can lead from anywhere, whether you have a title or not. And I like the perspective of the fact that you can make a difference. You can empower those around you. And and you don't have to solve the problem, right? So don't be intimidated, right? By having those tough conversations. So what would you say to someone that's like kind of they feel a little bit unconfident. They're not 100% confident, but they want to step up and they want to start helping those around them so that they can be seen as a leader. But when it comes to their communication, specifically, they just don't feel like they have the confidence to step up and start having some of those conversations that they know would be impactful if they did.
Yeah, I think the first thing is clarity. They need to get really clear on what's holding them back. Why are they feeling that way? Is this about maybe a past experience where you tried it and, in another organization or even in the same organization and things didn't go well and you're like, ooh, once burnt, twice shy, I'm never going to do that again? Or is this about you haven't had anybody model this to you and you're just like freaking out because you're like, oh my God, I've never seen anybody else do this before. How do I deal with this? I think getting clarity on what's holding you back is probably the first step to understanding what your next path is going to be. And
That's great.
that comes with setting an intention of wanting to know more and get better, right? Recognizing that if that's what's holding you back, I'm afraid to have this conversation. I haven't seen anybody do it before. Or the last manager I worked with, they tried and they got fired. Or maybe things backfired and they were the ones who had to go to remediation and we've got all these hard, difficult employees. What is it? You got to get clear on that first.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, definitely. I would have to, from the experiences that I've been in the workplace, you're right. You mentioned a pain point right there, which is a lot of people have had past experiences that they maybe haven't worked through, haven't dealt with. And it's interesting that you kind of you went and you decided to become an expert and have done your research, have helped many people in this area because you took a step back and really dissected what is it that needs to happen in order to be effective leading from anywhere as a leader. So now I want to dive into the 5 steps to managing conflict, because we talked about providing some actionable steps. And obviously you've already given us that with the pause method, but I want to dive into any more that you have for us in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, I just gave you a high level of the pause method. It definitely goes much deeper into that. But the 5 steps, and I'm glad you brought this up because I was starting to allude to it and I thought, oh, I don't want to get too far in the weeds. Let's come back to where you need me. The first step is to set an intention. What is it you want? And so part of that for me is, I mentioned the 3 values that guide me, and that's caring, connection, and curiosity. I recognize when I'm not working and living and interacting from those 3. When I'm in full defense and fight and talk mode, I'm often not in those values. I'm in preservation. I'm going to win. I'm right, you're wrong. And I can tell the disconnect. And if I can get myself back to those 3 and just have one of them guide me, then I can probably get back to a resolution with the person I'm in. Because then I'm coming from my authentic self where I actually genuinely care about the outcome.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So for me, setting intention is getting rooted back down to how do I want to be seen? And often leaders want to be seen as competent. And that is why we tend to have issues with leaders being labeled as bullies, because for them, they see a threat to their competence and then they get into their quadrant.
Right. They get defensive or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And what happens when, I mean, just think when you're younger and you're mad and you go to your corner and we're not looking at anybody. We're just stuck in our corner and there's no way, we're not coming out, right? We're going to be right in this corner. We need to turn in and we need to come back to the bridge that kind of connects all 4 quadrants in order to connect with the other person to find a potential solution.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense because I think we do. I mean, we all have our own default, right? When things get tough, when stress happens, our own fight or flight response. And the first thing is definitely figuring out what is that? What do I even do? What do I do when I go to my corner?
Exactly. And then set your intention as to where you would like to go. I mean, because remember, we're a blend of all of those. We can connect with something in ourselves that says, okay, I recognize why they're over there and how they could feel that way. Let's find a way to connect. So for me, my intention is about getting back to connection and understanding so that we can minimize conflict and maximize our relationship. That's the first step. The second step is to go into purposeful planning. So once I can turn back inwards away from the corner and I can look inside and go, okay, well, I want to be over there, but I'm currently over here. So how do I get there? It's like plugging your destination into the GPS. You have a path, and your path only reveals when you set your intention. So for example, if you're the leader dealing with conflict and you want resolution, you are likely to take activities that will guide you down resolution pathway. Whether or not you succeed is not the goal. The fact is that you are in motion and you're going to learn as you go through this. If your goal is to be right, the planning you're going to do is very different. You might chastise them in front of others. You may want to call them in and read them the riot act as opposed to ask questions and understand what happened. You see how the intention kind of highlights the path. So that's the second stage, is purposeful planning that will align you to your intention. Now, the third stage is super important because, as you mentioned before, people maybe don't always step into these moments. And we get really excited, lots of motivation. We're going to do this. Yeah, rah, rah. And then we don't take the opportunity when it comes because we're fearful, retaliation, failure, all sorts of things. So the third step is a gut check.
Ooh,
means come back to why you started all the planning. And know that you're going to do it scared, but get aligned to your intention. And then the fourth step is do it anyways.
I love it.
Okay. And then once you've done it, you're going to come back and reflect what worked, what didn't work, what would I change, what would I keep, knowing that each individual opportunity is a growth opportunity.
That's awesome because I love that you have reflection as a part of that. And I love that you mentioned you're going to learn as you go through it, because I think that if for people that are coming from this place of, I want to see growth in my career, oftentimes they may come from this place of, if I make one misstep, it's all over.
Yeah, fear of failure, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then this fear of failure, it a lot of times puts us back in our corner and we go back into default mode, and we don't push through because it gets uncomfortable and we're afraid to look stupid. We don't want to look incompetent. But the
Yeah.
reality of it is that part of becoming a leader is pushing through the hard stuff. You're going to have that gut check. So I love that that gut check is a part of it. Now, talk a little bit more about how you work with your clients on the gut check so that they can move past the imposter syndrome of,
Mhm.
oh, I don't want to have this conversation. I'm just like, oh, it's not good. They get back in the, oh, she's not going to change anyway. And it's not going to make a difference. And
Mhm.
it's not going to help me, stand out as a leader. Like, walk me through some of the coaching techniques that you really work on people with so that they can prove to themselves, yes, you can push through this.
Yeah, a lot of this has to do with self-limiting beliefs. So earlier I mentioned about getting curious as to what was keeping that leader from speaking up and understanding what those blocks were. This is a part of what creeps up, and it creeps up for everybody. It's not just in conflict, it's like in everyday life. You want to go learn how to skydive and you're like, yes, I'm going to do it. I'm going to sign up. And then I cancel because we get nervous and we get scared because we're not going to do it right or something's going to happen. And so the self-limiting belief is really connecting in with what I call the inner critic. And I have a name for mine. Her name is Sheila. My name, it's really me. It's inside my head.
I
And
love it.
I encourage people to give that inner critic a name, because then you can say, hey, Sheila, let's go for coffee and talk to them like they're a friend. I know
Yeah.
you're scared right now and I can understand why. And let me know what's going on. What are you thinking? What are you hoping for? Like, remember that vision you had, and you kind of have a conversation with yourself, but it feels less personal when you're talking to a friend.
That makes sense. Yeah. Cause it does kind of feel like when you're talking to yourself about all of the negative aspects or those negative feelings, it
Yeah,
kind of,
that's Sheila talking. Like, that's my girl talking. She's saying, no, you can't do this. Don't go there.
yeah. I mean, it
Like, I don't
feels
know.
like we've already proclaimed our failure,
That's right.
versus when you're talking to a friend. Would you ever talk to your friend that way?
Exactly.
No.
So that's why you give
No.
your inner critic a name and you befriend them, knowing that Sheila is there to protect me. Like, that's her job. She's on high alert looking for any threat. And when she sees one, she alerts me, she taps me on the shoulder and says, hey, don't go over there. It's dangerous. And I'll go, I'm going to go anyways. Come with me. Like, it's about really,
You're coming for the ride.
yeah, watch this. I got it.
I love it.
Hold my beer, Sheila.
Gonna party tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's just
Awesome.
one. That's probably, that's a really big one that creeps up, and it needs a lot of work and it needs a lot of attention. Just like a friend who comes to you and is in a really tough spot, their problems don't solve with one conversation. There's repeated contact, there's repeated nurturing. It's the same with Sheila.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Rome wasn't built in a day. And I know that just like, ambitious women, we want to tackle it all and we want to do it all well, without any obstacles in our way. But the reality of it is that's not how it works. You got to put in a little work. So I'm glad that you have this 5-step system to help those around, in order to help those kind of work through this and push past the fears, push past the inner critic. Now, I'm curious, you talked about one thing that I kind of missed within asking you a question on was aligning your leadership with your values.
Mhm.
Walk me through how did you come up with caring, connection, and curiosity to really steer you and help you kind of pause when you get into these situations? How did you come up with those?
Mhm.
And how do you help your clients identify those?
Yeah, we do some value activities. And it kind of was spurred on by a conversation I was having with a friend. We're in a course together, and she mentioned how conversations at our supper table were always so engaging because I was saying, oh my God, we had kids, teenagers, they never talk. How was your day? Fine. And she shared with me her technique to change the dynamic. And she says, you know what? We all talk about our values and how we live them. I'm like, ooh, tell me more. That sounds so good. And so then, she took me through some value activities. I'm like, this is amazing. And so inside my program, that's what we do as well. We work through identifying what our values are through a series of questions and engaging with others. So if I were to ask you, when you think of me, what's one thing you think of? And maybe you'll say, oh, you're just so giving, or you're caring, you always care about other people. You pay attention to those, and you're like, okay, that's obviously something that's really important to me. That's got to be one of my guiding values. And then I can recognize when I'm disconnected to it. And so for me, I just narrowed it down to 3. We start with a list of 10, and then we narrow it down so that we're really, you don't want to be overwhelmed, knowing that we share a multitude of values, but depending on the context, they shift in priority. And often that's a place of conflict. So that's another discussion altogether. But if I'm valuing connection and you're valuing privacy, we're going to have a hard time talking.
Yeah, we're not, we're on two opposite ends.
Opposites, right? So then again, how do we come together? It's about connecting in ourselves with the time when I wanted privacy. Okay, maybe we negotiate a timeline, maybe we negotiate topic or how many questions we can ask. What is that going to look like in this unique relationship so that we can get back to solving the problem?
That's interesting because recently I finally had a situation kind of come up within my interpersonal life, and I realized there was just this disconnect.
Yeah.
and we had that value conversation, and it's made a world of a difference. So talk to me about before and after. I want to hear about this because I know you've, as a coach, right? As a coach and through life learning experiences with our clients, as well as even with us and our own development, you can always kind of see the results kind of shift and be like, ooh, this is good. This is a good before and after. Kind of talk to me about before you came across and you implemented the value system versus after implementing the value system.
Well, I think before it was all about me. And I actually was talking about this the other day. And we have the me generation, as I say. I actually think the conflict styles is the me generation. How you respond and you get in your corner, that's all about me. That's all about me being right. That's all about me being seen. That's all about me getting my way. That's the true me generation. It's what do we do when we're not getting success in what we want? And so I think for me before, I was all about the me. And as we're young, it's probably quite suiting that it's in that generation because we don't know that it can be about the us and we can still be happy. We're figuring it out. We're separating from mom and dad. We're spreading our wings, and it has to be about me for a while so I can figure out who I am. And so for me, it came as a result of being bullied. Like I never wanted to be there again. Like, honestly, I've been there, got the t-shirt. I'll help you all through it, but you don't have to go through it. You can get to the other side without being full of anxiety and panic and fearful to leave your home. And that was really what spurred on the transition and the deeper self-work in order to understand, what is it I really want? I don't want to be right. When I was going through with my bully, we were like head to head all the time. I really want to be right. But that was the value that was leading me because I thought that's how I had to be. I wanted to be heard. I wanted to feel valued. I wanted to be connected. And so when I did the work and looked back, I'm like, okay, connection was probably underneath there, but being right covered it up so much that I couldn't get to it.
Right.
So
okay. That makes sense.
I was just way off track with my interaction because I didn't know any better.
Yeah. So you really uncovered what was your true intention behind that communication that steered you to communicate the way that you did.
Yeah. And I just didn't have the right tools because we're not taught any of this growing up. We learned it all on the playground. I mean, I don't know how much time we have, but I got to tell you a funny story.
My son was
in kindergarten. I always teach my kids, use your words because that's, where resolution is. And the girls were playing with him and the boys, and he didn't want none of the girls hanging out. So he went to the playground monitor and said, hey, the girls are playing with us and I want them to stop. So to the monitor's credit, she said, use your words. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome when I heard the story. So he went back and he said to the girls, if you don't leave us alone, I'm going to kick you in the balls. And I get this letter home, and I don't know if I should laugh because he used his words, be admirable because he's still so innocent. He has no idea that girls don't have balls, or become, like the parent and say, okay, honey, we need to tighten up your communication. So that's what we learn on the playground. We don't have somebody there to say, yeah, maybe we should try a different approach. We're just doing it. And if the girls left him alone, he would have been like, yeah, that's the way to handle conflict.
That's
Luckily,
funny. Your story reminds me, it kind of has spurred on a different question for me. I'm going to kind of go in a different direction. So
Okay.
It reminds me, when we go back to school, right? And you think back to school and how we handled our communication, we sit there, prim and proper for the most part, because our teacher is watching us, an authority figure is watching us. And then he or she may look away, and then all of a sudden our kid-like, childlike mentality comes in, and we're like, oh, well, we can do this, we can whisper, we can do whatever we want. So right, exactly. So when you're dealing with an authority figure that has, a communication style that is difficult for you to navigate, maybe you've never really came across a leader that is super straightforward to the point where you become intimidated, or just a bully. Like, how do you handle an authority figure that you have to interact with in order to work towards the same goal? How do you navigate that?
I am so glad you asked that question. In 2005, Vital Smarts did a study, and they surveyed 1,700 healthcare providers around conflict. But one of the things that came out of that study was that there was only 10 to 15% of people who felt comfortable to speak up when they saw, people breaking the rules or doing bad things. And of those 15% that spoke up, 85% of the time, the offending behavior stopped with one conversation.
85%?
85%. The problem is we got to get the other 80 to 85% of people willing to step in. And that's the gut check. That's where people stop, because they don't actually go, okay, I'm going to do it scared. I know it's important. I'm aligned with my values. I know where I'm going. I'm going to have this conversation.
Ooh.
Because we haven't seen anybody else do it.
Yeah, exactly. And we talked about the behavior that no one's looking, or the behavior when people are. It's almost like we're just so accustomed to behaving in a certain way that when it goes against something that we're not used to, that we've never done before, that we don't see, it's intimidating for sure. So but I love that you have this gut check of do it scared, do it anyway. And that's probably where working with someone comes into play, where it's helpful, because I think about the times that I've had the most difficulty doing something or following through because I was scared. It's always helpful when you have someone helping you, that's saying, you got this, girl.
Yeah. And that's where a coach or a mentor comes in really handy. So if in your organization, there's somebody that you don't want to just go to a friend and complain, because that's gathering your tribe, and that's on the bully side of behaviors. You have to ask, what's my intention when I do that? And so maybe you have a colleague who's willing to mentor you, and that's something you need to declare up front. Listen, I'm having a hard time. Can you walk me through how I might respond differently, or how I can go back and revisit this conversation? That's fine then to talk about your situation. If a colleague is not the right person, then ask your boss or supervisors if there's a mentor program. And if not, then you'll want to hire an external coach to help you get through those pieces.
Well, thank you for walking us through that, because I know, especially, in the workplace, it happens all the time. You want to improve, but it's one of those, it's easy to get swept into the I'm going to vent about my situation culture, which really isn't helping anything out.
Again, that's that insight. You got to know, and we're all guilty of it, right? I do it too sometimes. I'll catch myself going, wow, I was just talking about them because I wanted to feel better about myself. I actually wasn't looking for their guidance. My intentions weren't aligned with who I want to be. Now I got to close that gap. I need to go back. I need to go back and apologize to them for using them in that way. And then for me, my practice is, that's often a moment that will catalyze me to go talk to the person I'm having troubles with. Because I want to get ahead of the shitstorm that might be coming now, because I've just done something that's outside of appropriate for our relationship.
Right. That makes sense. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Because
Yeah,
I want to be seen
I
as
love his
competent.
5-step system though, because essentially like, you're looking at your values and it's helping you
Make decisions.
make decisions. And also, as far as the intention, like the intention to me is so powerful because I don't think that we take the time to set the intention of how we want to be perceived, but also to look at our intentions behind how we communicate. And that's something that you've really brought forward to me today that has really been impactful, because I think as we go through the motions and we don't really slow down and we don't pause, as you mentioned, not, a lot of times we don't look at our intentions, and it can be apparent to those around us, but not to us.
Yeah. 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 It's so true. It's so true. When someone gets on the phone with me and they're telling me about their problems, like I can see like a laser focus. I'm like right at the heart of it right away. But I have to watch because I can't just go there because they're not ready to hear that. I
Oh
kind of like,
yeah. That's interesting. I want to end on that note.
okay.
So you just mentioned that sometimes you can see it right away, right? Just like your best friend can see it. Oh, I know what she's going through. She just doesn't know what she's going through
Yeah.
yet,
Yeah.
right? So you can see it, but how do you know when it's time? And how do you know when they're ready? And how does someone get into the mindset of being open to receiving feedback that's going to help them?
Mm-hmm. So my answer is going to be a question. Well, not a question. It's going to be you ask questions. You ask better questions. You keep asking questions to uncover. If they're blame centered and outward centered, they're not ready. If they're inward centered and they're going, yeah, you know what? I probably did bark a little bit more than I should have. They have the capacity to self-reflect. They're ready. That's a critical factor to determining if someone's going to progress to the next stage. Having that self-awareness and the ability to reflect and take some ownership is a critical key. But if they're blaming and shaming and pity party, victim mode, they're not ready.
Oh, wow. You just hit it nail on the head. Ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
it's a two-way street for sure. It's
Always.
not just the other person that is the culprit. You have and I think that's one thing that, especially when we're caught up in the emotions and frustrations of conflict with those around us, we think that, oh, it's all them, and we don't take any ownership. But the reality of it is they responded that way for a reason. Maybe it wasn't right, maybe it wasn't the best way, but you have a part in communicating with those around you also.
100%, 100%. Yeah. So I always just share with people, give grace to yourself to not get it right, because we do get into reaction mode first. You can always come back and revisit a conversation, and give grace to the other person to not get it right either, because they might be in their reaction mode and it's not lining up with where you are right now. So grace is such an important piece to getting to connection and trust again.
I love it, because sometimes we don't handle things the way that we want. That doesn't mean that we can't go back and say, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't handle that the way that I wanted to. Because
Especially in our most important relationships, like you think
yeah.
of your spouse, your kids, the ones that are closest to you, they get your full reaction.
Oh my
We
gosh.
don't hold back. We are like staunch fighters of our corner. Our flag is in, and it takes us sometimes a little bit longer to come around in those relationships, which is why it's so great in the professional sphere, is that we have that container of our role, and it kind of pulls the reins in a little bit. We still react, but we can come back and revisit a little bit cleaner than we can in our personal relationships.
I love that too, because it's almost like you can kind of take a look at that container of your professional life, and it's the groomed behavior of, I have to be respectful in my communication to a certain extent. Like, don't get me wrong, we all have those bullies, like you mentioned, but that on a scale of 1 to 10 of professional being respectful is probably at a pretty decent level
Mhm.
in comparison to those that, are closest to us. You're right. They get the wrath. So we can almost kind of take a page out of that book and say, ooh, I need to be more respectful in my communication with those people.
Yeah. And I think this might be a good time if I could just share what I'm offering to them, because one of the biggest
Yeah.
questions I get when they kind of learn this stuff is, okay, well, what do I say then? How do I get out of this corner, and how do I come to connection? And what's something I can say that will open up the conversation?
Yeah.
And so Dr. Martha Griffin back in 2004 did a study where she had given people scripted responses and then kind of measured how they worked. Fabulous. So I've taken her 10 scripted responses. I've modified them just slightly to fit maybe a non-clinical setting because it was in nursing. And they're the safe conversation starters that you're going to have a link for, I understand. And in there, there's also a really quick 3-step process. The setting intention is in there, but if you want to use the 5-step, augment that paper. And you'll find that there are 10 standard things that you can say that do not create defense in the other person, but you can bring up maybe the eye rolling or the sabotage or the gossiping in a way that's going to stop it or open up conversation for exploration. So you can enter into the pause model by creating that space where we're pausing this tension. We're going to get curious as to what's going on. We can share and we can come up with solutions, and then we got to do it.
Awesome. So you're kind of taking what do I say? You're taking the scariest part about having those conversations out of it, really, is what you're doing.
Absolutely. Because that's what holds people back. They don't know
And
what
I
to
love it because that's exactly what holds people back. And if you do want to move into, a leadership role or be promoted or whatever it may be, even if it's just become an entrepreneur or whatever, you have to have success. You have to be confident in your communication and able to handle conflict. And obviously, this comes up in all facets of our life. We were just talking about our spouse, our children, you name it. It's going to come up. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
So I'm so thankful that you're providing this free resource. What is the name of the free resource again?
Safe conversation starters.
Safe conversation starters. Awesome. So amazing, Tammy. Thank you so much for being here today and offering this free resource so that everyone listening, you can go and move forward and have those conversations and not be scared to have them. So thank you, Tammy. Any last words?
No, just get out of your corner and explore. It's a nice world out there. You just gotta be willing to
I
move
love
those other
it. Get
quadrants.
out of your corner. You are worth it. You're worth having these relationships are worth exploring. I love it. Thank you everyone for listening. We have more coming your way, so stay tuned.